Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about interest, which is one of the two main ways you can generate a return on your money. As you can see, there are four main things we're going to talk about in this video, and the first one is the general concept of interest rates, which you may have heard about. So interest rates are set by central banks around the world, and a central bank is an organization separate from the government, which is something like the European Central Bank, the ECB, the Federal Reserve, or the Bank of England. These are the three biggest, and you probably read about them in the news quite a bit. So the role of these banks, as I said, non-political, outside of the government, is to control the economy and make it as good as possible. It's a bit like creating a recipe in the story of Goldilocks and the bears trying to make the perfect porridge. So that's what the central bank is doing. They're taking all the inputs of the economy and they have certain levers that allow them to make it run as well as possible. And one of the most important things is to keep stable economic growth and target inflation of 2%. And this is deemed to be the perfect amount of growth in prices on a yearly basis, 2%. And one of the main ways they do this is through interest rates, which is one of these levers I mentioned. And you may have heard about this quite a lot in the news, especially over the last 5 years, maybe even decade. And one of the reasons is because we're living in historically low interest rate times. So as you can see in that chart, the European Central Bank has put an interest rate of 0%, and that's been the case now since 2015. And this is quite similar to a lot of major economies around the world. And the impact of these low interest rates is that it affects the interest that all of that economy is going to be charging. So when you, even as a person, lend money to someone, and that's a way of generating a return as an investor, your rate of interest, i.e. the amount that you say you want to get back of what you give each year as a percent, will be affected by this. So at the moment, interest rates that you can even get from anywhere will be low. And I'll go through some examples now. So the first one is governments. So you can lend money to the government, and governments are always borrowing money, and that's how they fund a lot of infrastructure and even welfare, and that's through what's called government bonds. And the rate at which governments have to pay back the interest on the money is, of course, impacted by these interest rates set by the central banks. So you can see in this table here some of the major countries in the world, the yield, which is the interest rate that these countries have to pay on their debt. So you can see, say, the US, one of the largest in the world, is 0.7%, and even the Netherlands is even negative, minus 0.3%, impacted by those very low rates in the European Central Bank of 0%. And usually the riskier the country, the higher the rate, because you want to, well, get some sort of recompense for the fact that you're lending money to someone that's risky. So you can see there with Brazil, for instance, not the safest bet in the world if you're going to lend money to them compared to lending money, well, to the Netherlands. So in that case, they're paying you interest of 6.6%. So of course that's more attractive to you as an investor, but you have to take into account the fact that it's riskier. And that is a fundamental concept of investment that we go through often in our series, the difference between risk and return. And of course, the higher the risk, the higher the return, or the higher the potential return, I should say. So there's also an impact on banks. And these are everyday banks that you, as an individual, will put money into in a deposit account, say, so your salary or any money that comes into you will go there. And by doing that, you're effectively lending money to that bank, because they can then do their own things with that money and get their own return. So they pay you a return, an interest rate, for having money in the bank. But of course, the rate that they're paying is impacted by the general interest rates of the economy. And in Europe, as we've seen, the fact that it's at 0%, then most of the banks in Europe would be paying 0% or less. So Triodos, for instance, a bank in the Netherlands, says here that it's paying you just 0% return, and if you have a balance over 100,000 euros, you actually have to pay them 0.5% to have your money in there. The next area we'll look into is companies. So here, companies obviously are also impacted by the general interest rates. And this example here is bonds. Again, these are just the certificates of the money issued to Philips. And you can see here that the interest rate changes quite a lot each time they borrow this money, and they're borrowing vast sums, as you can see, 500 million euros often at a time. And it changes a lot historically. So the oldest bond you can see there is from 1995. There are two, and in those cases the interest rates are around 7.5%, and that's because at that time interest rates were much higher, set by the European Central Bank. And now the interest rate that they're paying is much lower, nearer to 0%, and the most recent one was in 2020 at 1.4%, and it had gone up a bit since the 0.8% in 2018 because interest rates had started to go up, but since they've come down again, so the next time they issue debt it will be even lower. So that is a brief introduction into interest rates, and the way it will affect you as an investor will be that the higher the interest rate set by the central bank, the higher return you'll receive, and vice versa. Thanks for watching.